Okay, hello everyone. Thank you again so much for joining us for our webinar on blockchain today. We're very excited about this one, and David Padula will be leading us today. We are going to go ahead and get started. First, I want to tell you a little bit about our organization. ProcureAbility is a consulting firm that focuses on three main areas. Procurement consulting, where we advise our clients on strategy through procurement assessments and transformations, category management, strategic sourcing, and any other variation of supply chain or procurement issues. We also have a procurement talent organization where we do staff augmentation and recruiting. And lastly, our third division, analytics and intelligence, where we deliver valuable insights through predictive spend models, cost and scenario modeling, and procurement dashboards to help our clients save money. Procurement is all we do, and we make it our goal to take our clients' procurement organizations to the next level. To tell you a little bit about David, he has 20 years cross-industry experience that ranges from automotive to apparel, telecom, utility, entertainment, technology, pharmaceutical, really everything. He's an expert, and we're very excited that he's going to be sharing with us today. David, would you like to get started?
Yes, all right. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to everybody for joining today as we try to figure out together if blockchain is right for me. So a quick agenda overview here. Let's already covered procurability and what we do. I'll try to get into really more what is blockchain for those that want a better overview and a better understanding of what it actually is, what are smart contracts, some of the actual procurement, procure to pay benefits, and then try to dive into a little more of the supply chain benefits specifically around and some use cases. And then what I hope will be valuable here is a framework that you guys can take away and really think through with your own businesses and your own use cases around if blockchain will actually make sense for you and for your business. So not too much more to add here from what Melissa covered, but just to reiterate, procurement is our only focus. We've been doing it for over 20 years, really worked with over 300 of Fortune 500 clients and growing. So what is blockchain? And this is the question that I'm sure a lot of you have on the call. Some of you might have been very familiar with the term just over the last few years. Especially about a year and a half ago, I think, when Bitcoin was really booming and people were trying to figure out what Bitcoin was, and then you would hear about blockchain. But the real message here is that blockchain is not Bitcoin. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, they run and transact with blockchain technology. And this technology was created initially to run transactions for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. But you have to think of it as its own separate technology. So that being said, what is it? Like, what is actually blockchain? I like to recommend, that clients picture it as a Google Doc, basically, like a Google Excel sheet for transactions. And it's tracking change history. And that history is duplicated on multiple computers that are called nodes. And then it's designed to regularly update itself across the entire network of nodes. So that's the basics of blockchain. It's an incorruptible shared database technology that's a digital ledger of transactions. Now the transactions get recorded as blocks, and each node on the network must actually approve the transaction before it's added to previous blocks, thereby forming the chain. And if the majority of the nodes do not approve the transaction, it won't take place, which pretty much makes it impossible for anyone to manipulate the system on their own and come in and try to hack it in some way. So the other benefit is that cryptography is used to ensure that copies are identical and then no transaction is actually duplicated, as well as enforcing specific permissions for reading the data that's actually stored. Transactions ultimately represent a transfer of information between two or more addresses within the network. And these can represent, for example, business entities to IoT devices and back and forth. And blockchains can either be implemented within the same company or in a public and even a private network. And the key thing here is that there is no need for intermediation of any like individual transaction, and no like intermediaries as like this kind of single or like central authorities that are rubber stamping these transactions. And we'll get more into that a little bit later when we talk about some of the use cases. I think it's also important just to frame up what this technology really means and how new it is in a lot of ways. If we look back, for probably over the last 40 years, we've had an internet structure that's it was created and has existed basically to move information around, and it has transformed the way that we work and the flow of data between people and companies. But ultimately, when we email somebody a document, let's say, we're just sending a copy of that original document, and anybody who has that copy can make a copy and so on. So when we want to send something to someone else of like real value, what's in money, for instance, we need to rely on a ton of intermediaries, banks, government agencies, who the banks have checked with to validate identity and have insurances to cover, any fraud or manipulation behind the scenes. And there's multiple levels of validation and cross-checking between all these intermediaries to ensure that if I'm sending you money, I'm the right person and you're the right person, and the intended parties ultimately are who they truly say they are. Now, blockchain, to me, is really the internet of value, because with blockchain technology, we have a new digital medium for value that we can actually manage, transfer, and store for any asset, from money to votes to music or even to cars. If you're, all types of assets that you're trying to sell physically, you can do that with blockchain and know that it's trusted and secure and will be validated in ways that regular internet transactions are just not capable of doing in an efficient manner. So that being said, let's talk about distributed ledger technology for a second. A lot of you are probably familiar with centralized database technology, and then some, companies have gone to decentralized structure. Well, with distributed, it is this consensus of replicated and shared and synced digital data. But the key being, there are no central administrators or centralized data storage repositories where everything is stored. Each user ultimately has a copy of the entire ledger in the node, and they participate in confirming transactions individually. So another kind of layer here of how does that differ, the common question, from a typical database structure that everybody's probably familiar with at work or even at home. Well, the foundation of this technology is really built on this concept of distributed consensus of transactions that are validated, executed, and recorded in a distributed network of nodes. Nodes basically just being computers, multiple computers across the network. So this distributed network actually allows participants to jointly create, evolve, and keep track of one immutable history of transactions or other successive events. And as discussed previously with the distributed ledger, there are no central gatekeepers. So no single body is required to verify transactions or authenticate their source. So this is actually done with the multiple nodes to eliminate, ultimately eliminate transaction fees that your typical intermediary would charge. And if a node is actually compromised, then the rest of the network will still remain secure based on its distributed nature. So if there's a specific like error or fault, it's not going to break the entire system because all these distributed backups with up-to-date data exist. And since each contributor is constantly auditing the ledger as well, the consensus structure reduces security risks and penalizes those that deviate from actually what's expected. So another benefit here really is that with blockchain, more than one contributor can modify the database at the same time from anywhere in the world. And the blockchain will, the technology will validate the transactions and all contributors can see the history of those exchanges. So that being said, there are different types of distributed ledgers, from public, and then what's called a consortium, DLT, distributed ledger technology, and a private DLT. So with public ledgers, anyone in the world can participate in the consensus process, the review and approval process. Anybody can read, anybody can send transactions to and expect to see them included if they are valid. And it's still secured by crypto economics, which the combination of economic incentives and cryptographic verification using mechanisms that are called like proof of work or proof of stake, like did you actually process this transaction through the cryptographic algorithm to prove that it worked or not, and you showed that you're able to show that you did that work to process it through. Now, for anybody that works in a large company, you're probably, and you haven't heard about this kind of stuff before, you're probably freaking out a little bit, like, oh my gosh, I can't have my financial data, I can't have supplier data, I can't have even, you know, inventory levels potentially from a supply chain standpoint posted in a public manner like this where everybody can see it. And, you know, there's consequences, especially if you're a publicly traded company, to having a lot of this data visible before an earnings report, let's say, or even just visible to your competitors potentially. So that's where the consortium and the private ledgers come into play. So consortium ledgers, some of you might have heard of the more common one that's called Hyperledger, which was actually founded by some consulting firms and other businesses. They use a consensus process that's controlled by an actual pre-selected set of nodes. So other businesses or firms that are a part of this ledger, let's say the Hyperledger, for example, are the only ones that are allowed to see the data and confirm it and run that consensus process. And the key here, though, is that the right to read the distributed ledger may be public, but it also can be restricted and with permissions set to specific participants and nodes on what they can see and what they can't see. So this is a great, for most businesses, you're going to want to go with a consortium ledger unless you are one of those, you know, cool startups that wants everything known, which a couple have tried to launch over the last year or so. All my financials, all my, you know, transactions, everything's public. Everybody can see what we're doing and, you know, have visibility to why the CEO is getting his bonus or whatever else. And you know, that's not practical for probably most existing businesses. So consortium ledgers like Hyperledger, and there's a few others, are generally the way we've seen our clients go and what's been the kind of starting point. So the other one, though, is a fully private distributed ledger. With this one, the right permissions are kept centralized really to just one organization, and that's it. Read permissions, they could be public if you wanted to, but they're usually very restricted to whatever extent is deemed necessary by that business or organization. This you typically see in a database management environment, internal database management environment, or in an auditing scenario. So it's really is internal to like a single company. And so in you know, this is situation scenario, you do not want public readability, and it's generally not necessary at all. Some financial institutions and you know, banks, for example, are using the private distributed ledger. Okay, so this is probably one of my favorite parts here about blockchain in general, the smart contracts. What are smart contracts? Well, I mean, ultimately they are code, you know, software code that facilitates, verifies, or enforces the negotiation of performance of whatever agreements are done between two parties. They not only define the rules and penalties around an agreement in the same way that a traditional contract typically does, but they automatically enforce those obligations. And so I think we can pause here for a minute. My perspective on just the phrase smart contracts is that I don't like that they're called contracts. It's fine if they're called smart because there's some software and automation around there, but it's very confusing for clients and in general that they're called contracts because it's just code. It is not a contract as most of us know it. You can base them off of a standard contract in a way of like if this, then that scenario. So if my goods shipped on time, I want the vendor to be paid in 30 days. If they didn't, we hold payment. If the goods arrive to the warehouse, can all be coded based on expectations. If the goods arrive to the warehouse, I want the inventory populated into my warehouse management system, and I then want the goods received to be sent back, and whatever the sequence of events you want for payment, even through the procure to pay lifecycle, you can code smart contracts to do that. But they're not actually contracts. Most importantly, they're not really legally binding in any way so far. For anybody who follows technology, the legal system is usually far behind where technology is and playing catch up. So as a caution, don't rely on your smart contract to be a legally binding document. You're not going to be able to go into a court and show a judge your code and then expect them to even know what the heck you're talking about and to have that going on. There are hundreds of years of precedent around the words thou and shall and what the difference of them are depending on the jurisdiction you're in. So I always advise, still have your normal contract, still run your business in the same fashion you would, but then think of smart contracts as ways to automate processes within the blockchain and on the blockchain to find efficiencies where your typical manual processes might take days or weeks, or you have multiple intermediaries validating and checking stuff. Using blockchain and smart contracts, you can automate all of those series of events and sequences to be way more efficient, eliminate all those intermediaries, and drive cost savings as well as speed and timeliness. Things that could take weeks previously could take minutes or days, depending on how complex they are. So to me, that's why I really view smart contracts as the secret sauce and really the thing that makes blockchain interesting and what can make it useful for you in whatever environment you're in. Okay, pop quiz time is my favorite time. I want to make sure everybody who is listening is actually paying attention and following along. So, pop quiz, and please message this, to Melissa in the message window here. But are smart contracts legally binding contracts? A, yes. B, no. C, the code is the law. The code is the law. All right, let's give it a minute. And I'm not gonna jump out of the presentation here. It looks like yes, most of you have said successfully. Smart contracts are not legally binding contracts at this point in time. And we will have a Q&A at the end of this presentation for any questions that might come up then too. Thank you for paying attention so far. All right. So now we can get into a little more of the specifics around actual use case benefits. Because we're a procurement-focused firm, I wanted to focus at least first here on some of the procure-to-pay benefits that you can see from a blockchain process and how they would compare to a typical procure-to-pay lifecycle that most companies have up and running. There are some medium cost impact and high cost impact areas where with blockchain and the high cost side processing payments the validation for accuracy, and the actual payment issuance and remittance can be automated, and have allow you the ability to eliminate all these manual checking and even sometimes the manual three-way matching of what's going on. But it can really be a disruptor and improve the whole procure-to-pay process. Significant operational benefits can be gained with improved speed, lower workload requirements, and greater security through better information and data sharing. The key value areas in the process here are validation and authentication improvements, support for faster distribution of the rights and authentication to prevent fraud and improve security. There's faster PO management. Unfortunately, most current POs and goods receipt data management processes are pretty slow and manual. Getting your qualified supplier identified and even the PO creation lead times should all be automated and really sped up using blockchain throughout this life cycle. And the invoicing side, like I said, all manual scanning and whatnot that would be eliminated through the shared database access. And it would also improve reconciliation efforts because all the parties involved would have visibility to what was actually there and what they needed if there's any questions or concerns about maybe a discrepancy or a typo potentially on something that came through. Settlements would be much faster. This complete transparency, again, would really eliminate all multiple user inquiries. How's it going? Where are we at in the process? Has this been inputted yet or processed yet? I've been, pay a lot of standard questions that procurement folks get and have to go back, with their suppliers to somebody in AP to figure out. All that can be sped up and almost eliminated because you'll have visibility within the blockchain to it, and the right parties will know where everything's at in the process. And because it's automated, it's much faster, and you'll have that visibility if anything might go wrong along the way. So I think another big thing here is fraud and money laundering identification that is kind of inherent with blockchain's identity management and retention of payment terms and records and what's happened, where it's happened, when it's happened, would make it much easier to identify any fraudulent behavior throughout the procure-to-pay lifecycle, and which is something that's very challenging and sometimes time-consuming to do now, and even to have any kind of monitoring in place nowadays. But unfortunately, it does happen and is a reality within the procure-to-pay lifecycle. But that being said, with all this stuff inherently baked in the blockchain, stakeholder trust is greatly improved as well. With this increased visibility, you're allowed to layer on some shared performance metrics around delivery, quality, on-time payment that will ultimately help build trust between you and your supplier, and even internally throughout the procure-to-pay lifecycle along the way. And that will have big impacts long-term. And ultimately as well, there's this tamper-proof audit trail. All the ledger participants for all the parties involved will have the visibility, and you'll be able to ensure that the records really cannot be tampered with. So what are some of the overall supply chain benefits then beyond just the procure-to-pay lifecycle? Well, as we've discussed, blockchain can really provide increased supply chain transparency across every vertical of supply chain, as well as reduce costs and risks across the supply chain. Specifically, the blockchain supply chain innovations can really deliver some key benefits around increased traceability. That's from the material side of the supply chain to ensure that whatever your standards are for the types of material you want in your supply chain and running through your supplier pool and networks are what they say they are. This could be anything from we've seen diamond mines. I'll show you next. Have been using blockchain to ensure that the goods are to say they are, but all types of luxury goods, from traceability and fraud, as well as pharmaceutical companies. Imagine all the fraud and knockoff products that exist on the pharmaceutical side. If you can trace the history of the materials from cradle to grave, really, which you can with blockchain, it's a real game changer and a huge benefit throughout your entire supply chain. So, lowering all those loss from counterfeit and gray market trading that happens depending on the type of goods that you sell and work with. Also gives you improved visibility and compliance over all your outsourced and contract manufacturing, because if they're participating on the blockchain, you're seeing what they're doing, not only from your suppliers, but their sub-suppliers, tier 3, tier 4, as far as you want to go down, to have visibility into what's happening, where those goods are coming from. The individual farms where the rubber is being harvested that went into make a tire that's on your new Ford can all be traced, and you can see that cradle to grave life cycle with blockchain. Now that actually might be something that Ford would want to make visible to some folks, just from a marketing standpoint, because it's typically very difficult to do that now, and it would take a ton of paperwork and administrative costs to make that happen as well. But it can all be done and automated with technology like blockchain. So secondarily, if you have a blockchain solution with the type of transparency and the materials used, like with Ford, it could give you some improved corporate reputation, improve your credibility and trust with your stakeholders and with your customers and around the data that's being shared. Reduce any potential risks from supply chain, interruptions and malpractice, allow you to really engage with your stakeholders. And with this transparency and accurate end-to-end tracking, organizations can ultimately really digitize their physical assets and create this decentralized, immutable records of all the transactions, which really make it possible to track assets from production all the way through delivery, even to the end users, think through your whole supply chain life cycle, and back to returns, which should be significant for any consumer goods companies that have to do recalls from time to time. With this technology, you would really be able to pinpoint the exact batch of goods down to the individual good, potentially, that had some type of issue. If there's, from a recall standpoint, if it's a food source, maybe spoilage, or if it's a physical product, some damage that makes it dangerous and you need to do a recall. Instead of how it's done now, as we all know, in large, chunks. Okay, we're going to recall just this month's worth of stuff because we don't know exactly how much of it was there. It costs you millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to do that, and it's a huge headache for everybody, including your customers. With blockchain, you're able to really pinpoint the specific batches where you had a problem, do that recall in a much more efficient way, and even track the goods as they're coming back through your supply chain to be, scrapped or repurposed or whatever they might need to be. So giving you much more control over your entire supply chain in ways that you haven't had before. Streamlining your whole administrative process, reducing your costs, and enabling this effective auditing of the supply chain in real time, instead of having to do all these manual checks for compliance or even credit. In some instances, that could take weeks. It can be extremely accelerated through the use of distributed ledger technology. So use case-wise, I only want to focus on a few here. There are plenty of other ones, but I think some of you might have even heard, it's been in the news around, what IBM has done with Walmart. They're really trying to put a focus on food tracking and safety, making it really easier to verify that the food is safe to consume. This is a pretty cool proof of concept that's they're expanding now, but they're able to trace from a pork farm in China, bacon, which is everyone's favorite food, all the way from the farm, the processing plant, from China, on, ocean freight, through the ports, and to the actual retail stores in North America. The first time anything like that's been done at that scale, I think it was about a year ago, actually, and now they're looking to expand it out. But, it's not just because I work in supply chain, but I really believe that the supply chain side of blockchain is probably has the most beneficial use cases for blockchain. And it's really ideal for industries where there's goods that are passing through various pairs of hands, to be able to track that from the beginning all the way to the end, like we said with what Walmart did, even to the consumer. So De Beer is another example. They designed actually their own blockchain solution that established a digital record for every diamond that was on the platform, detailing country of origin, and that it was sourced and mined in ethical ways. I think the art industry and a lot of other luxury goods industries, as I was saying before, could benefit from something like this, as really giving you this kind of provenance with your goods, and ensuring that whatever you're selling and whatever the customer is buying is the authentic good, preventing counterfeit and fraud. And these things are really like a perfect fit for blockchain. And the World Economic Forum, if we kind of look at this timeline on the bottom here, is projecting mass adoption and real maturity by 2025. But what I'm seeing and what the market is really showing is that today we're in the pilot stage. Most companies are just running pilot programs, testing it out, trying to see if it's what it is, if it's a fit for them. I see that continuing for at least another year, maybe 2 years. But the question to ask is, do you, and within your company, do you want to be one of those early adopters? You don't have to be. There's no rush in a sense. But the folks that are adopting the technology early, just running small pilots, just trying to test it out, get familiar with it, get comfortable with it, will have an advantage. They will have a leg up over the next few years because they'll be able to move much quicker. They'll have a better understanding of it throughout their company, because you don't want to just do it in a silo. You want to involve other, business units and divisions in the pilot programs as you launch them, just to provide visibility for everybody. And so you will be one of these early adopters that will have a much more tactical experience that you can bring to the table when it comes to ramping up blockchain in the next couple of years, if your company wants to ultimately jump into it and move quick on it. Okay, so that brings us to the questions before blockchain. And what I like to propose here is what's called the FITS model. And really what this is a framework and a way to qualify and determine if blockchain is the right solution for your business process. So questions to ask: are there trust issues with third parties, suppliers, sub-suppliers, or even your customers? Are there middlemen involved, intermediaries that are delaying the process and charging for their time, or official, just rubber stamping, like custom clearances is a great one. Do the goods arrive on the port? Yes. Okay, here's the $100 bill to confirm that. Blockchain can automate that. Are there large amounts of stable data that needs to be processed, or is that data stable, and are there large amounts of it that need to be processed? Sorry. So if we go to the first one, fraud, unfortunately, this is a reality within procurement and within business. Depending on the area you work in, depending on the industry you work in, there are different layers or different levels of this. But blockchain can really help reduce and even in a lot of ways eliminate fraud, at least as we know it now, through identity management and transaction authentication. That is very inherent and built in the blockchain. So if fraud is something that you're dealing with and you're looking at in a process that you're working with and you're looking at bringing blockchain into that process, it could make sense. It could be a fit if fraud is an issue. So on the intermediary side, if you're buying a house, or a car, or you need a ticket to travel, these type of middleman companies are usually involved. But ask yourself, if value creation is not really occurring, blockchain can virtually eliminate the need for a separate entity to validate that a transaction has actually occurred. The transactions, in the real world can really take like 3 to 5 working days because of all this like validating and rubber stamping. Those can be reduced to as little as 1 to 2 minutes potentially. And not only will you save time, which is money, but you'll eliminate all these fees that intermediaries are typically charging. So sometimes there's a good reason to have intermediaries, but if you don't feel like, if they're in your process now and you're considering blockchain for that process, and they're not actually you don't feel they're creating real value for what they're charging, then blockchain could be a great fit to run a pilot and see how it can improve and make things more efficient and ultimately reduce costs. So next, throughput. Now, this is interesting because the throughput, or really the number of transactions for blockchain, is limited right now to a pretty slow 10 per second, which sounds like a lot maybe, but like large banks and financial institutions, they prefer about 8,000 transactions per second. So, which is kind of mind-blowing, but it's important to keep this in mind because, surprise, surprise, blockchain is not perfect, and it's not the solution to all the world's problems, and it's not going to, be the future of the internet for everybody in the current state that it's in. So you need to look at this and figure out if high throughput is part of the process that you're working with right now that you're considering blockchain for. That might not be the best fit at the moment. That being said, some researchers are really working on and they're projecting that they can up that 10 to 400,000 per second using decentralized computers. There's a new network that came out recently called the Lightning Network, I believe, that's trying to get there by pulling some of the transactions off blockchain, running them behind the scenes, and then posting them back. I mean, it's a workaround. It's pretty cool, actually, but it's not mainstream yet. And so we're not there yet. And anybody who's probably going to want to do some pilots over the next year needs to factor in throughput, or they won't be happy with the results that they're going to get. Stable data is the last one here. What that means is that you want stable data if you're going to be working with blockchain, data that's not really likely to change over a period of time, things like ownership, financial transactions between parties, and then from a manufacturing side, tracking and traceability. Those work best in a blockchain environment. Again, because of the slower throughput, if the data is constantly changing with different types, different sizes, all types of different data points, blockchain is not, set up to run that. I mean, you've seen anybody that's been following Bitcoin when it was booming about a year ago, some of the transactions, individual transactions, were taking up to 2 weeks just because of the massive volume of it and sometimes the instability that was going on within the network while the different kinds of transactions. So these are all important things to keep in mind and considerations when you're looking to bring in blockchain. But now we have another pop quiz time. I want to see some answers, see who's been paying attention. What does the F in the FITS model stand for? A for fun, B for fraud, C for Frankfurter, or D for frozen? Please go ahead and message your answers in the Q&A window here. A couple Frankfurters coming in. All right, most of you, yes, are correctly choosing fraud as the correct answer. All right, thank you again for paying attention. All right, in summary, before you start this digital journey and are considering implementing blockchain, even in a pilot stage, as the old saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. If you're just adding a technology solution, any solution, not even blockchain, if you're just going to dump it on top of a bad or like a flawed process, it's not going to get you the results that you really want. Blockchain is not the cure-all to fix your current business challenges. If a process is currently working well, but there are inefficiencies that fit into the FITS model, then it's worth considering a blockchain assessment. And based on the findings from that assessment, you can build out a proof of concept. Only after you've also ensured that your data capture methods are in place and that your organization is ready for the coming change. It's not something that you want to just dump on the organization. These type of proof of concepts and pilots, we always recommend that you do run them in parallel to an existing working process. And then once the results are clearly speaking for themselves, you can then flip the switch to go live and maybe stop the previous process. But keep in mind, should the process you're running ever change down the road, which it will, for whatever reason, your smart contract, the node relationships, and the overall blockchain process may also need to change. So much like just your business in general, using blockchain is ever evolving, but making adjustments to the process to continue to capture and realize efficiencies and savings from using blockchain may clearly be worth it in the long run. So I want to thank all of you guys for watching this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A and ping us now.
I actually do have one question that's come through already.
All right.
You can go ahead and ask that one. It is, how many blockchains are up and running right now?
That's a great question because you hear a lot about blockchain and you don't see a lot of real use case examples, especially if it's not something that you're working with directly. So it varies by industry, but there are hundreds that have launched over the last year. I would say, honestly, though, the financial industry probably has the most use cases and actual live blockchains, and some even like production blockchains that they're using. One of the bigger use cases on the financial side, because they've been doing it since, honestly, because blockchain was kind of created around cryptocurrencies. The financial industries have been working with it and have their hands in it longer than anybody else. But remittance payments, like cross-border payments, are a great use case for blockchain, being able to ultimately just eliminate Western Union completely, and companies like that, or the crazy high bank fees that are charged to send money across borders to family or friends. That can all be done with blockchain and identity management for much, much lower fees. So that's one that a lot of banks have actually implemented and are running and using now. But then around the supply chain side, there's probably 40, 50 that I've seen and are familiar with. But again, most of those are really just pilot stage projects, proof of concept type things. That's mostly what I've seen and what's out there so far from a manufacturing and supply chain standpoint. Any other questions?
Yes, I have I have two more actually. This
right.
one is, would blockchain compete with the Procure to pay system? Would it supplement it, run completely separately?
It really could do either. What's interesting right now is that you've got some of the larger procure to pay solutions out there like Ariba and Coupa talking about blockchain, integrating blockchain behind the scenes to what they do. But there are some other startups that have come into the market that are offering their own standalone blockchain procure-to-pay solution that could totally eliminate all the other platforms that are out there. We tend to hedge our bets with clients on this. Most of our clients actually already have a procure-to-pay system in place that they spent a lot of money to bring in and implement, and they're not going to just turn it off, and especially go to a new startup that has a blockchain solution. So having those discussions with your current providers, determining where they're at in their product lifecycle from a blockchain standpoint, and how they could bring that to you to find some efficiencies, share those efficiencies, cost saving gains actually from using blockchain instead of the traditional P2P lifecycle that they probably have you on. Those are great conversations to have, and we always encourage clients to just reach out to their providers that they might have right now. And then otherwise, if you don't have anything, and you might be a little more open to it, have that top of mind. And when you're starting discussions with procure-to-pay providers, ask that question. Find out where they're at with it. Do they offer it now? Are they going to be offering it? And it can actually be something that you'll use as a scorecarding metric if you feel like blockchain could be a good fit for you and your company down the road.
Perfect. And the last one I have is, how exactly do you bring physical assets into the blockchain? And I suggested GPS, RFID, and barcode scanning.
It's not as easy as it might sound. From the tracing standpoint and trackability, yes, barcode scanning is a great solution. And it really is like our old favorite QR code type scenario where you need some type of a scannable code to pull in that data point, location-based, transaction level where it's at in the process. You need something to scan to bring that in, but you got to build it to do that. I mean, that's where I was going. Is it's easier said than it sounds, because to do that, you're going to have to put an infrastructure behind the scenes. You got to have folks with scanners. You got to have somebody that's either has the ability to scan the stuff in or key it in to get that traceability. So for me, the real, ultimate future state for this is small, independently running, battery powered IoT sensors, Internet of Things sensors on everything, if not the SKU level, which would be the ultimate, I guess, but at least a pallet level, master carton level. And these sensors are just running and sending out signals all throughout your supply chain, from the original manufacturer even to their sub-suppliers, and as the goods get incorporated within the bill of materials to your finished good. They're tracking, they're reporting back, they're recording status. It could be location-based, whatever that data point is, recording it on the blockchain throughout the entire product lifecycle and giving you that real-time visibility. But again, you'll need scanners and sensors to pick up that signal along the way. So some infrastructure needs to be built around it. But that's a great question, because a lot of the stuff you hear about, all the benefits, it sounds really cool, and it can come across like it's ready to go right now. But from a pilot standpoint, yes, you can test and prove all that out and make sure it works. But from a large scale mass adoption standpoint, no, we're still years away from that. And I believe in that 2025 target to where we'll be up and running with it on a much broader scale. But yeah, we're still years away from mass adoption because of all those reasons.
And then I actually do have one more, and we have time, I think, if you'd like to take it, David.
Sure.
Do you anticipate current P2P software providers incorporating blockchain protocols into their products? If so, when? What do you know about their current efforts in this area?
Yes, so I definitely see that happening. It is happening. Specifically, I know that Ariba, with their Leonardo suite, which is really kind of their technology stack, SAP's technology stack for a lot of different things. Ariba sits within that. They are implementing blockchain now. Well, they say they are. I have not seen a client actually use it yet. I have not heard how it's going. But if you're using Ariba, internally right now, definitely pick up the phone, talk to your sales rep, find out where they're at in that product lifecycle stage, find out how soon they can bring it to you if you're interested, especially just from a pilot standpoint. Work with them, or your other, like as another example, Coupa. They've been talking about it. I don't know exactly where Coupa is in their product lifecycle with actually using blockchain behind the scenes, but they've been talking about it. So use that as a kickoff, discussion point with any of your P2P sales reps, and make them do a little bit of the heavy lifting. Ask them, let them know that you're interested in running a pilot within your company to see how this works. And I'm sure they'd, for one, would be more than willing to talk to you about it. We can help you do an assessment on the viability of it, but have them work with you to talk about an implementation timeline. There might be ways that you can get them to absorb a majority of the cost to actually get that up and running and launch that pilot for you, because all of these companies are looking for use cases and their own proof of concepts to test it out, grow it, and be able to speak to it and resell that to other clients. So this is kind of the sweet spot where you can take advantage of that a little bit, and as a sourcing professional, I would tell you, achieve some cost savings in your implementation stage and phase by putting the burden back on your existing procure-to-pay vendor, because they're hungry. They want to get this stuff done and proven even more than you do, because they see the viability of it and the benefits of it for them and for their clients.
Well, that was all of our questions for today.
All right.
David, are we ready to wrap it up?
Yeah, we'll give you a few minutes back here. Thanks again to everybody for joining. This webinar was recorded and will be published shortly after this. So stay tuned. If you registered, you will get a notification of that, and you'll be able to share that recording afterwards as well. So thanks again for your time today. We really appreciate it, and hope you enjoyed the presentation.